in New Orleans, the French Quarter, and we are on Season 4 of Covendom, Episode 6. Our topic tonight is medieval witchcraft. I'll give a little bit of a brief intro about that in a moment, but I want to introduce who we are and tell you how to watch us. We are live on YouTube and we are live on Facebook. You can comment on both places and we can see your comments collectively. You guys like YouTube commenting better? It's a little easier for everyone?
We can see both.
Okay, we can see both. And we love it when you start talking to us and we can see what's happening and we can respond to what you're thinking about. We are also a call-in podcast. So after we give some information and we're into the program, we love people to call. And the way you do that is you call 309-463-3377 or 309-GODDESS. That's how you call in. And at some point, we'll try to say that number again.
That's interesting.
So if you have questions, we can actually talk to you on the phone and answer what you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Got a couple of little announcements about Covendom and our activities in the New Orleans Coven, and then what will become the Salem Coven. So next Friday, January 28th, we are actually Brian and I are hosting a live candle mass ritual that will not be filmed. It will be something that people can come and attend and join in with us and appreciate the time period, that celebration, that Sabbath. That's next Friday, so we will not be having Covendom. February 5th, the Salem Coven will be hosting their candle mass ritual open to the public, and then following a Alexandrian soiree. So those of you located in the Salem area can attend that ritual and then go further with the group and ask questions and learn more about our specific Alexandrian tradition. And then February 18th through 20th is WitchCon, and the website is witchcon.com. This will be year 2. This is a massive online magical and witchcraft event. Started last year because of coronavirus. We needed some things to do virtual. It was such an incredible success. We're doing it again. There are over 100 lecturers, and tickets are very inexpensive. You can watch every single lecture forever. You get links that you can just keep logging into this stuff and keep watching it. And there's also showcasing of the vendors, and you'll be able to see products and things for sale by people who are teaching. So those are our 3 announcements for Covendom tonight. And here's what I want to say about medieval witchcraft and what we're going to try to focus on. The time period for the medieval period begins at the end of the Roman era, which roughly is 450 AD in England, and it moves through what are called the Dark Ages to about 1500, where we begin to see the Renaissance in Italy, and then that sort of spreads out into the rest of Europe. So really, technically, that's the time period we're talking about. But when we say medieval witchcraft, all of us immediately think of Old England, the Dark Ages, the Anglo-Saxon period, the Viking raids, the incredible domination by the Catholic Church, and its narrative and description of everything in Europe, particularly though we're focusing on England, and how witchcraft came about in popular culture, what we think about links or connectivity between actual pre-Christian activity through the Catholic era and then up to today in the modern era. And we will be, of course, bringing this back around to why it matters to British traditional witches today. And we've all got different theories. We've all brought different ideas and things we've researched. And we're going to start with our
Levi
icebreaker.
Whatever
Levi's
that's going to be.
icebreaker.
So I did do the icebreaker this week, and because I am that annoying uncle that buys your kids educational toys, it is trivia. So it's going to be trivia themed around the medieval witch cult, and things to do with it. It's just some questions.
I need my button.
God.
I need
Players,
my button.
are you ready?
I'm ready.
First of all, I will not. And thank you for all we see your
I hate
comments.
trivia, just
Thank
so
you.
everyone knows.
Thank you.
So, question number 1. And the rules are you must wait till the question is finished before answering. Okay? I have rules. What biblical figure, besides the devil, were witches frequently accused of worshipping in the witch trials?
Herodias.
Very good. Bonus question. Who is Herodias?
Herodias was the wife of Herod, blah, 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 blah.
Of Herod, yep.
Yes,
And the mother
I
of...
can't remember his Salome. And she was, I mean, I have a lot of opinions about that, but she was identified later on by the church as being the first witch.
Yep.
Ooh, I
So,
love that.
yeah, question 2, and this one you probably won't know, but I thought it was a great teaching question. The Inquisition changed its name and quit being, quote-unquote, the Inquisition in what year?
I have no idea.
I know, but I have a point to this.
I know. I just wanted to talk about it.
1490.
1908.
Okay.
It was still called the Holy Inquisition until 1908, until its current incarnation, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which the former Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, was the head of, right? He was the head of something that used to be called the Inquisition until 1908, which is very recent.
Weird.
Very recent.
Right.
Next question. It used to be very popular in self-proclaimed pagan circles to put the number of people killed in the witch trials in the millions. What author, and bonus points if you know the book, first made this a popular belief and spread it like wildfire?
Well, I know it happened in a song.
I have no idea.
I don't know if it came from a book, but I think it was Margaret Adler. I think maybe Margot Adler.
Starhawk, the
Oh,
spiral
was it
dance.
Starhawk?
Right?
I don't think it actually comes from her, though. I think it comes from a song that's been very popular in the craft. So I think it predates her, but I could be wrong.
Oh yeah, but she put it in print, and it became
I see.
very
It's
popular from that
wildly
book.
different. It used to all say
Yeah.
7 to 9 million people.
16
and now
million.
we say a few,
There's-
a
okay,
couple
my-
100,000.
Question number 4, and this one has quite a few acceptable answers. There are a handful of places where more men than women were accused or killed for the crime of witchcraft. Can you name one?
A handful of places.
Somewhere in the Netherlands.
I don't know
Holland.
what place that... I
In
mean,
continental Europe, it was almost 70 to 80% women.
maybe Scotland.
Iceland, Estonia, and Russia, so areas that were way away from Central Europe, thought that more men were witches than
Oh, I
women.
see. Interesting.
I thought you'd like that. A very famous book and a part of the witch trials that became quite influential. What does the term in Latin Malleus Maleficarum translate to?
Hammer of the Witches.
Yeah.
Very good. Hammer of the Witches, right? A very important book that was used by witch hunters during the witch trials. The Sabbat in the Canon Episcopi, which is a very famous Catholic document I'm sure I'm going to talk about tonight, were also called the games of what pagan goddess?
Diana.
Yes, the Ludi
I
Diani.
love that.
I love that too. It's one of my favorite things they called them, the Ludi
Like,
Diani.
what are you doing tonight, Elie? Oh, games of Diana.
Yep. This is a fun one. What famous torture device found in many fun, like carnival museums and movies, was never actually used in historical torture? It's one of the most famous images of a torture device, and it was never actually used.
Thumb screws?
The Iron Maiden.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's not real. It's literally a fabrication from later years. Okay. I have more.
I'm ready. Keep going. I don't know anything, but I'm
Okay.
excited with the question.
You got Hammer of the Witches?
The word veneficus, which is the Latin word used to describe witches in many texts, does not mean witch. It means what?
Pharmacist?
Evil?
I will take that because it's poisoner, but it comes from the...
Pharmakeia.
Brian is right, pharmakeia, which is the Greek word, right, for a poisoner. Okay. Fun question.
Oh, sounded really different to me for a second. Go.
Where in the Bible can you find descriptions of the devil as horned, cloven-footed, and hairy?
Nowhere.
Exactly.
No.
Trick question. None of those images are biblical. The folk devil comes from paganism, right? I had one more that I want to do because I'm running a little long, so I'm not going to do all of them. What Scottish girl accused in the 1500s of being a witch and executed for the crime of witchcraft told her accusers that the devil gave her the ability to travel to the Sabbath in the form of a hare?
Is it Isabel Gowdy?
Yes,
Okay.
Isabel Gowdy, right? Isabel Gowdy, we still have her chance. Hers is one of the most well-preserved witch trials that we have, actually, and Emma Wilby did an incredible book on her called Isabel Gowdy, and I can't remember the subtitle, but a beautiful book by Emma Wilby.
Mm-hmm. And is she young? Really young? I don't think of her that way. Isabel Gowdy. A girl?
She was very young, yep.
No.
And then here's a fun one to end on. What sexual act, mimicking a Christian greeting, were witches said to do at the Sabbath to greet the Dark Lord?
Kiss his bottom.
Yes. Yeah, it was called the Infernal Kiss.
Oh, I love that tea.
Trivia. I think Brian won.
That's great. No, Brian won. That was wonderful questions, though, and great answers.
Well, I probably had kind of a bit of a refresher because some of this has been on my mind. So when we were coming up with show ideas, this is one of them that I threw out there. And of course, I'll give Levi and Elie strange titles with no explanation as to what I've got in my mind. But I think they got the gist of what I was kind of aiming for with this show. And Levi's terribly excited about it. Elie was terribly excited about it. Mm-hmm. So we're talking tonight about the medieval witch cult. And so I'm going to begin with what my opinions are about this and sort of my thoughts about the show. So as we already explained, the medieval period is very long, and there's of course a lot that happened, but what we can say for certain is that this was a Christian era. This was a time in Europe when Christianity ruled, and particularly the Catholic Church, right? So that's firmly established. This is not a part of pre-Christian Europe, okay? So why would we look at this in regards to witchcraft? Well, first of all, the word witch developed within this era, and so did the English culture, and it's leaning towards more factual that even the Old English language is not necessarily pre-Christian. So obviously it has roots that are, and that, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the point being that this, from the way we say it to the things we think about it, started developing really strongly during this time. And, we look at this time period and there's a lot happening. There is obviously a lingering memory of their pre-Christian past. A lot of peoples, especially when we go early on into the medieval era, mm-hmm. they might have had, great-grandparents or whatever that were functioning pagans, mm-hmm.
Some of them probably still were. I do believe that pre-Christian practices, I believe some pre-Christian practices existed all the way into the present day. But as time went on, we lost more and more of that identity. And the church still had a strong memory of its former rivals and in some cases persecutors. So whether or not there was a living memory within an individual, there certainly was a living memory within the egregore of the Catholic priesthood, the church, and their viewpoints on these things. When we look at the roots of this subject, we can see it happening in pre-Christianity. We can see the old gods being turned into daemons and demons eventually. We can see references of Aphrodite being called a demon. That's stuff that exists well before the medieval era, well before anyone was talking about witchcraft. So we can sort of swatch this transformation of cultural thought, and of course when we're talking about Europe, we're talking about a very big place, right? So when I talk about the different ways in which you can define the word witch, one of them is the churches, right? Because they're probably the most influential. When we talk about witch in European culture, it's the church that first brought that into European culture. I think that, as far as the word witch, modern British colonialism has more of a hand in that through the King James Bible. But the sort of ideas that predate that, or the attitudes about pre-Christian sorcery or magic in general and pre-Christian religion, it began to have a transformation. So most of us are well aware that the general idea at this time was that witches worshipped the devil. What most people probably don't realize is that's not how the story started. So if you go back and you study what the church said about witchcraft and you study the written documents all the way up into, as Levi was wanting to distinguish, much of the witch trials that happened later on are actually after the medieval period. Mm-hmm. However, they're still influenced by these group of thoughts, right? So
originally speaking, we have records of the church saying that witches worshipped Diana, the last goddess of the pagans. And then you go on and you find reference after reference after reference of Diana and versions of other iconic goddesses, some of them that are very obscure to the medieval period, and some of them that we can easily trace their roots to their pre-Christian past. But there's so many names. You know, you've got Diana, you've got Herodias, you've got the Queen of Elflame or the Queen of the Fairies,
Yep.
You've got Noctilia, you've got Holda, you've got Habundia or Abundia. Strangely enough, Minerva. She's
in the canon Episcopi.
Yeah. Strangely enough, she gets in there too.
She does.
You know, but you find reference after reference of all these different goddess-type figures that are associated with witchcraft. And in fact, if you go read Margaret Murray's God of the Witches, which is more referencing the witch trials, there's more stuff about these goddesses in that book than there is the devil. You know, he is referenced. But the devil was, you know, as we've taught people... you know, carrying on the old horn of God images. You know, it was related to Hades and Serapis being the lords of hell, basically, with their pitchforks, sometimes horns. You know, you've got Pan and Faunus and the Pucks and popular images of pre-Christian horned creatures going into the, you know, iconic Celtic Carnanus and things like that. So these images are all kind of interwoven into the gods of nature. And what we have happening is that the people of the cities were, you know, sort of remembering that a lot of these practices were rural and agricultural, and so they started identifying them with the country people because they still believed it existed. And, you know, without going down too long of a trail that could never end, right? I want to say that there was definitely a belief by the church and a belief in that era that existed in some ways to the present day, that there was a religion of witchcraft. However, this religion belonged to the Queen of Fairies and the devil, or one or the other. You know, in the later period, it was more given to the devil. But there are cases in which they were one and the same. You know, so interestingly enough, this old European idea about witchcraft was that it had a male and a female icon. You know, it just happened to be, you know, a spiritual queen and a devil. She'd become less of a goddess and a witch or a demoness, and he'd become, well, the devil, right?
Yep.
So this is something that existed. Now, whether or not there was actually a pre-Christian influence on some sort of secret cult or mystery cult or not, whether or not this actually existed, I think is completely irrelevant. You know, I've got my own opinions and fantasies about this, but it's irrelevant. The idea or the mythos of it is what matters. And that mythos is what has impacted European and occult thinking to the present day. And yes, you'll have people try to dissect, we all do it in some level, but try to dissect whether this could have been real, whether it was real at any period of time, whether there were resurgences of it, you know, and what have you. It's irrelevant. The point of it is, just like every other religion, we've got these set of myths that have inspired human faith and belief in the divine and religious rituals and an egregore. And we are very much still influenced in modern craft. The Gardnerian and Alexandrian tradition were influenced by these witchcraft concepts. And if you were to transport any of our covens or circles to the landscape of merry old England in the year 1314, and anyone was to happen upon us, they would know they were looking at witches. They would know they were looking at witchcraft. They would not be confused about what they were seeing. You know, and there's a reason for
then
this.
They would kill us.
Yeah, and then they would probably try to kill us. But, you know, the point of it is that there is a seamless sort of set of ideas that go on here. Now, before I pass on the baton, I'm going to say that I do believe that there was at one point a cult of Diana, or a cult of the goddess. I don't know how big it was. I don't know how long it persisted, but I think the memory of it certainly influenced the church to be a bit paranoid for a while. And I think that more than likely there wasn't one universal witch cult going across Europe where everyone was talking, to my knowledge anyway. I'd be very surprised. But I think there's nothing new under the sun. So in my imagining, I think there were probably several witchcraft revivals, most of which are undocumented. Mm-hmm. What we have to realize is that in the annals of human history, we know less than what we know. And there's a lot not written down, and especially in the medieval period where people couldn't read or write. Right. And if you were of the mindset that the devil or Herodias or whoever could give you powers, or if you went to the fairies for magic and you wanted this kind of connection, you were not satisfied with your life or with Christianity, I think a lot of people would have sought it out. We're still doing it today, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So I think more than likely there were probably independent groups, covens, individuals, solitaries, by whatever name they were called, communities that were doing things that were witchcraft-like, that popped up all the time. But I also do believe that there was one final mystery cult to the goddess Diana. I don't know how impactful it was, but I think it was impactful enough to where the church remembered it, which shouldn't surprise us considering the geography of the Roman Catholic Church and the goddess Diana. Anyway, so I think it goes to Elie now. Right? Yeah, Elie now.
My slant's historic.
Right.
That's what I would. What's your slant?
Religious.
Okay, let's do me next then. I think that's a good
idea. One last thing. This isn't actually on the medieval period, but probably the most influential book on the subject of witch trials outside of Margaret Murray's well-known stuff is Mr. Reginald Scott. But his book is like a series of books put together. It's not easy to source. It's not easy to research. It doesn't have an index. I would recommend, if you want to use the original manuscript, try to get it on like Google Books or Kindle, somewhere where you can search for words. But this book is fabulous. It was written by a man named Philip Almond. It has a foreword by, or at least a blurb by Ronald Hutton and some people I don't know. But it's written about the book. Yeah. So he's really taking you through the book and dissecting it in a way that might be more relevant to someone curious now. I'd recommend having both, but this is a really good...
You need a companion. Yeah. The Discovery of Witchcraft is really difficult to read. What's it written in Middle English or Late English or something?
It's just so terribly organized.
It's just
Levi might have a better luck with it than I do, because for me, I have to actually take notes because I'll never find something again.
Yeah. Okay, I love that. I have the Discovery of Witchcraft, and I'm going to buy this because I need help with that book in general. I started researching medieval witchcraft. The way I begin to study something or look at something new, I need to frame it up in terms of either timing, location, history of famous people. I just have one of those kind of compartmentalizing brains. So I would put my mind on, first of all, what was happening, and I'm focusing on England. And the reason I'm focusing on England is because I consider England the actual motherland of modern witchcraft, and particularly British traditional witchcraft. I know there's Italian witchcraft,
I
French
want that
witchcraft.
Patricia Crowther music to start up.
There's Slavic witchcraft. There's Russian witchcraft.
You find the story of witchcraft is really the story of England.
It is very
right,
sorry, Alec.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. So I look at it that way, and so I've been to England many times. I love England. That's why I think I'm also really attracted to witchcraft. But I wanted to think about what was going on in England during the medieval period, and just to put your mind around some of the way the people would have thought about the world at the different times. So first of all, the world of the Celts, this is something we talk about a lot because many people pattern their mythologies after Celtic mythology. 400 BC, all the way through the Roman era, there's still people that genetically, I think, are Celtic. Right.
Oh, well, there are
not very
there's
many,
6 living Celtic nations.
But there are, right?
Celtic isn't considered...
So, to current times.
Being Celtic is considered a culture nowadays.
Right.
It's considered a culture and not an ethnicity.
Right.
Yeah.
But when the Romans started coming there in 50 AD, that's what they saw. They saw tribal Celts in Britain, Scotland, and Ireland, but with king lords clumps of farmlands, and they were not really organized, and they had a really specific Bronze Age identity. Is that right? Bronze Age for the Celtic period.
Yes, they were bronze.
Through there. So the Roman Empire is expanding, and it gets to England. It sends a lot of people in there, and it starts structuring England. It put in roads. It put in government. It brought currency and trade, courts of law, and systems of reading and writing and education. Bathing.
They had bathing.
And they brought.
Don't really know.
In the
I think they
beginning,
probably did.
in the beginning, they brought the Roman pagan religions because that's what they were
Not as
doing at the
much.
time, right? So,
Yes.
so that 400 years, 50 A.D. to 450 A.D., where the Roman Empire fell apart, and like Brian said, in that 400 years, people aren't going to always be remembering personally what happened 400 years ago.
No.
They're just not.
No.
They're going to assume
Different world.
the
Yep.
culture that
Yeah.
they're born into.
They also had a whole different concept of history.
So in 313 AD, Constantine declared Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, and slowly it began to sort of take over the Roman Empire lands and Christianize them. Certain places were faster to change, and other places, like somewhere in Scandinavia, didn't convert to Christianity until like 900 AD.
You can
or
still
something,
find it
right?
today.
The
when you
11th
go
century
into-
for
11th century.
Estonia and Latvia.
When you
has
go
this
into
like that.
rural places today, you can still kind of see it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I know you guys have traveled, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You go to a big city and it's more erased, but you go to a smaller place.
And they're still like, that's the tree we go to when we want to get pregnant.
Yes.
like that's very much a thing that's alive everywhere. Yeah.
I didn't have to go to that tree. So imagine what things were like in 450 AD in England. The structures were pretty. There was government. It was pretty strong. As the Roman Empire fell apart, the people, the Roman Britons, stayed in Britain. Probably a lot of them didn't retreat back to Italy. They didn't have money. They quit getting paid. So they're like, crap, I live on this land. These are my goats. I might as well just keep staying here. But then what happened?
Direct quote.
But then, right, that's what I might just keep staying
Direct
here.
quote.
My goats now.
As things began to disintegrate, we really need to put our mindset on what happened to England, what we call the Dark Ages, which is 450 AD to about maybe 1000 AD. The Angles, which is where England gets its name, the Saxons and the Jutes, which are basically German, the Gauls came from France, were tribal, hedonistic religion, pagan religion people, not affected so much by the Roman Empire. They began coming across England in waves.
Do you mean heathen?
Heathen.
Yeah,
What did I call them?
Hedonistic.
Yeah, I was like,
Were they
Heathens.
that?
They
Were-
were hedonistic also.
Just a
all
bunch of drunks. Everybody in the ancient world.
Probably.
Before the bishop showed up, everybody.
The northern tribes were
That's
less
right.
affected by the Roman
That's
Empire,
right.
but
That's
nobody escaped it, really.
They didn't.
No.
They kept coming through in waves to get new farmland. I love their hedonism. Okay.
They were trading
So-
with Rome and fighting with Rome. And
They
all
were,
that sort of thing.
and Rome kept them out, kept them back. When the Roman Empire collapsed, no more defenses against the northern
there was
tribes.
free,
They just got
free
flooded.
range.
So
then.
the 5th century to the 11th century, we have England kind of reverts back to tribal lands. Small kings are developing over, who's the most powerful warlord in their region, developing little armies and groups of farmers that were loyal to them.
This is when England really became a thing.
This is when England became a thing, and it became
One guy, can't
one-
figure it out.
one king
Alfred.
in
Alfred the Great.
828 AD is when England was called England and had one unified king. 828 AD. So it was, another 400 or 500 years of just warring
There
tribes.
was a lot of barbarism. Yeah.
But out of that period come the Arthurian myth things, ideas that were written about by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1100 and
That was
something.
from France.
But you have the idea,
But they're based in England.
it was French, but based in
Yeah.
England. What I call Castle England, where you had large stone buildings with fortifications, farmland all
I live in
around.
Castle, England
Right.
with my goat.
Everybody had horses.
Practicing my
Love it.
hedonism.
The wealthy people had horses. The knight and chivalry began to grow as an idea. The kings and queens and the princesses, and we started to structure government around the castles and the king of that region. And we have
Yeah.
all that. Arthur was a British, maybe a Roman Briton who
No, he-
pulled together the different tribes and won England away from the French.
No, he was a native king that that was
I
anti-Saxon.
feel we may have gone really off the rails
Yeah.
on witchcraft.
No, we haven't. But
We
think
have.
about-
We absolutely have.
But think about the content of the Arthurian legends. Merlin,
Okay.
the magician, the dragons, the elves. I mean, what I'm getting at is in this period we have developed tremendous superstition and mythology around magic and different kinds of people, special people, under the ground people, magical power people. So I think for hundreds of years that was the mindset. You know, the general folks on the ground were really thinking about, you know, everything could be spiritually good or bad. I need to watch my back. There's weird stuff out there all the time.
The spirits, yeah.
But some people know how to manage that a little bit better. So we come through the Arthurian period, the knights, the castles, the kings, the queens. Okay, this is important, what I call Castle England. Then you get 1066, Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror. That again kind of
That's when my
concretizes.
mother's family arrived to England with William the Conqueror. My mother's ancestor was his flag bearer. His only name was Fleming, and after they succeeded in winning, he was given the land by the River Wye, which is how they got the name Whitney.
Is that your mother's name, Whitney?
My mother's
Family's
paternal name, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
lovely.
The other part of my mother's Swedish.
That's an old...
Finnish
old
Swedish,
family.
more Finnish than I realized.
The
Yeah.
cathedral building...
They've done another update, by the way, on Ancestry.com.
Cathedral building stonemason timeline in England particularly is 1040 to 1540 AD. So we all have that kind of mindset about how the Catholic Church, and I don't think of England as Catholic today, but it was up until Henry VIII. Everywhere was Catholic,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
So
well,
the
yeah.
churches control the monasteries, they controlled writing, reading, education, they were the law, they were the government. The Catholic Church definitely was intending to rule its empire, sort of replace the Roman Empire, by religion. 1192, the Crusades began. 1118, the Knights Templars began traipsing back and forth to the Holy Land. 1200s, England and Scotland battle constantly, and the main wars were between
think this
England,
goes into the
France,
arms
and
race.
Spain. No, 1348, the arrival of, okay, this is my question to you guys. What came to the shores of England in 1348?
The Black Death.
The Black Death.
Rats with fleas.
Can you imagine,
bubonic
though,
plague.
the poverty? There was also like a mini ice age during those years. The poverty, the 100 Years' War.
I think we're in it again.
The Year of the Roses. This was a very difficult time in England. And how did people survive? If you were an herbalist, a midwife, a veterinarian, a weather worker, I mean, you just had to have those people to get along. There was just feudal, rural, poverty-stricken, difficult
I mean, by now,
times.
don't we all want to worship the devil in this story?
Right. Well,
I
the
mean-
Catholic-
Listening to all this, let's all go worship the devil, kiss his butt,
The Catholic
and get
Church
really hedonistic.
wasn't really doing a lot for folks. They were like, come into slavery and help us build one of these cathedrals, or bring all your food to us so that we can make you sit on your knees on a stone floor for 8 hours while we pray over you, and then you walk 7 miles back home. No, they just didn't want to do that. I mean, I really think they drove them being crazy. 1491, Henry VIII is born. 1533, he severs ties with the Catholic Church. We know that whole Henry VIII saga. 1585, the Roanoke colony was sent over here.
What does that have to do
Ma'am,
with
you're not even in the right era anymore. This
I
is-
know, I'm ending with the Middle
I feel like I'm in
Ages.
7th grade again.
I'm ending with the Middle Ages, but I wanted to talk about...
You passed them up a while ago.
I thought you said the Middle Ages went all the way up to...
15.
Into the
1400s.
1400s, with the fall of Constantinople. But yeah, it's
All right, we're good though. You've covered it.
All right.
Well, surmise what you're getting at here.
I want to talk about sorcery, which is what Roman law just called witchcraft. Really, they probably meant sorcery. Those were handed down in Britain. The church had difficulty bringing factions into the fold, the rural, the poor, the magical thinking folk. So they began creating the image of the witch, the old woman, lame, blind in one eye, had little cats and toads around her, right?
yeah.
Was she blind?
And she was a heretic. We talked about this a few months ago, that it was really not against the magical side until they started to link the heresy. You are now against
Yeah.
the
Because
Catholic
even,
Church.
like, you're right about, I mean, it's a French word, sorcery, but yeah, sorcery would have been a word that was sort of, kind of was like that version of a witch, but
Well,
they all usually had more than one word.
Right,
So,
that's right.
they would have, just like we have witchcraft and magic
Yep.
now. Yeah.
the going going to the Sabbath, the practice of consorting with the devil,
Worshipping
doing
something
his
else.
work, worshiping something else, is really what brought about the witch hunts.
It wasn't whether you had power; it was where you got the power
Where you got
from.
the power from.
Yes.
I'm just bringing in these ideas that I really thought about in terms of medieval witchcraft. I wanted to remind myself of the history of England, the hallucinogenic side of things with the flying ointments. They had knowledge of the poisons, the plants, and how to kill people, how to heal people.
And they were hedonistic.
They were hedonistic, and that was probably pretty terrifying to the church fathers. One interesting thing I read was in the monasteries, like in the 1200s, all the monks were having wet dream problems, serious wet dream problems. So
I think that's probably still occurring.
That's probably still going on.
So they
to
were
be
like
honest.
talking to their father, like, dude, why is this happening? You know, I just can't prevent it. These beings, these women are landing on me in my dreams and causing this problem. The succubi, and where are they coming from? Oh, they're those people out in the woods consorting with the devil. They shapeshift. They can come into your dreams. So I think those monks really got pissed off about it, and they said, let's do something about it. Let's get the Malus Maleficorum working, and let's get after this. So the witch trials started, and in the 1500s. We know that's late. That's after the medieval period. But I'm saying just what Brian's saying. I think modern witchcraft used those ideas coming out of that, and I think the church really controlled the narrative in the Middle Ages about witchcraft. That's what was written about, advertised, talked about. The local people didn't have access to the internet. They couldn't really make any kind of narrative. The folk on the ground.
They had no Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi. So we love the history, the myth, and we continue to bring knowledge of history into our modern practice. It is true about if you found us in 1100 at the Rollright Stones doing what we do now.
They didn't think we were fairies or witches.
Everyone around us would say, that's a coven of witches and they're having a Sabbath. So we obviously formed our style after a lot of aspects of medieval witchcraft.
And if you look at before we pass it off to Levi, if you look at the medieval Sabbath, which I'm sure he'll talk about, they're not really that different from the old pagan festivals.
No, they're not.
You know, it's just a twist on it. You know, the old pagan festivals, they weren't generally eating babies, but you know, the debauchery, the nakedness, the orgies, the magic, the revelry, the divine worship, the ecstatic way that they were functioning, the dancing, all that stuff sounds just like a good May Day festival to me.
Yes, it does.
So anyway, we're going to pass it on to...
It took until 1953
Master Levi now
to repeal the witchcraft law
Yes.
in 1953. So
Levi's got a lot of thoughts
Okay.
on this. He is, the only thing I would argue with you about is my theories on how the word Herodias formed, but I don't know if we're going there. So
it's just the feminine form of Herod.
Yeah.
But
it's a feminine form of Herod, but it's a pre-Christian word. It existed before the Bible. There were lots of people.
Well, Herod was Jewish.
Yeah, but it was a Greek name. Still a Greek name.
Yeah, they were ruled by the Greeks.
It's an old Greek name.
I think there's a lot of interesting things we're going to talk about with callers and with questions that come in. But my only really big things are twofold, because I think I want to save the rest for natural conversation that comes up. One is the narrative that Elie is talking about. There's nothing wrong with it, but I will say most scholars don't actually break anything down the way that has been broken down here tonight. There is no such thing as the Dark Ages, and there's no such thing as the Renaissance. That's not a thing. The Renaissance was a time period where they had a very particular ideology that the past was too religious, or that it was controlled in a certain way by anti-intellectual forces, and therefore they created backwards this concept of the Dark Ages, and we are the humanistic era.
It's more of a philosophy of man's thinking.
Yes, it's not real. Most of the witch trials, the most violent wars of religion, the 30 Years' War, the French Wars of Religion, the destruction of the Huguenots, none of this is the medieval era. But if you ask a random person on the street, when did they kill all the people for being different religions and when did they burn all the witches, they'll say, the Dark Ages. Right. It's dead wrong. No, they didn't. The church was actually quite a bit more merciful at that time. It became hardened later on, after the Protestant Reformation in particular.
They had bigger problems.
They had much bigger problems, right? The medieval era also gave us an incredible amount of...
And the church wasn't in the position yet, really, was it? Yeah.
The medieval era gave us incredible amounts of poetry, law, language, beautiful literature, beautiful mythology, organized court systems, Charlemagne. I mean, This is all
hedonism.
true, right? The thing is there is no break where the church
and around the world,
breaks,
a
right?
lot of great things were happening.
In like the 1400s in Italy, you start having this concept of humanistic teaching, and you have Erasmus in the Netherlands and whatnot. But there is no clear break, and the most barbarism, if we're going to use that term, actually happened later. The High Middle Ages was not a time, with the exception of the Crusades, which was removed from the European homeland, that we would associate with that. So that's my first point: is that this is very complicated, right? The second is, and I'm not going to actually delve into this too deeply. I'm just going to say it. The word myth is not a synonym for the word false, the way it is used nowadays. So if you see an article that says 10 myths about being a vegan.
Different.
Right, 10 myths about being a vegan. What it means is 10 non-true things, 10 untrue things about being a vegan. That's not what that word ever meant. The word myth was something that conveyed a truth in a narrative or poetic
mythology,
form. Right? So do I believe in the myth of the witch cult? Yes.
Yeah, so do I.
With all my heart, right? Do I need it to be factually true? Not necessarily.
Yeah, we won't ever know.
No. There are some Orthodox Jews who need the Exodus to be literally true. There are some Christians who need it to be literally true that Jesus of Nazareth could walk on water. There are some Buddhists who need it to be literally true that the Buddha was born standing up and talking at birth with golden skin, and that the sun shone from, between his eyes. There are a lot of people who believe those things in a different way, right? So I think I'm going to just kind of put that in the ether a little bit about this concept of the witch cult, or the cult of Diana, or the cult of Herodias.
I was going to say before this show started, and I forgot, to everyone suspend their disbelief a little bit.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I love about history is it's just kind of like space exploration. There's so much we don't know. We know a lot, but there's a lot we do not know. And historians will say that quite frequently. So, we don't know what happened in some village for 300 years with every individual person's spiritual beliefs. No. It may not even be written down. There's probably villages all over Europe that had no single document.
Oh my God.
Down.
It goes so much deeper than that, because one of the things that's very important to remember is the Catholic Church reformed itself greatly after the Protestant Reformation. There was a huge, long period where they were having what became known as the Council of Trent. And one of the main things the Council of Trent realized, because it was a Protestant criticism that was true, was that the priests weren't that educated in their religion. There were lots and lots of priests who were
probably
not
witches who were priests.
Heavily educated in the Mass, who could not read Latin as fluently as, priests or clerics used to be able to. And so there was this concerted effort after the Council of Trent, but that's very late. The Council of Trent is in the 16th century, so this is this push in the Counter-Reformation to have intelligent priests. Oh, thank God, we've got to have some intelligent priests. But just because someone's a priest did not mean that they were well-educated, right? So they might not have had the knowledge, so they would do what Brian's talking about. They would have bits and pieces, and they would say, I saw my local flock that I shepherd going out with a sheep to do something. Well, I don't understand a lot of the old pagan customs, but I remember Diana, so that's what they're doing, right? And it just became this sort of denatured, backwards-looking thing, right?
I also think it's important to realize the possibility, and I don't think this is too hard to believe, because we can look at, like more recent things. Like one of my favorite things to look at is in America, Native American culture. If you look at how it went with Native American culture, there was a concerted effort to make them lose their language, their art, and their religious practices. And they did probably lose a lot, but a lot of it survived. Now, there's been a lot less time. We're talking hundreds of years versus thousands. But you could see this and relate it to a lot of different cultures that have been Christianized or colonized throughout the world, where there's been genocide and things like that. And when you get out to the country or you get out to rural places, things are slower. They're slower to develop. And, even in 2020 or 2019 or whenever it was I was there in Italy, there were certain things going bump in the night in Nene. There were certain Eleusis, like it could have just been in our imaginations, but those women who were hanging out at Eleusis seemed to know a little bit about something. And there was current offerings there. Yeah. And there is no vast modern pagan movement in Eleusis. This was local stuff going on. and you get that all over the world. There's been there's an archaeologist, a magazine called Archaeology that published a dig that they found in England pretty recently. It's now about 15 years old or something like that. But they were digging up witchcraft artifacts, and they were able to go back hundreds of years and catalog these different artifacts and see that the same practice had been going on into the 50s. They don't know who was doing it. They don't know exactly. They were calling it witchcraft. They don't know exactly why. But there were these offering baskets made out of animal parts, and you went back hundreds of years, it was a crane and crane eggs. And you get into the 50s and it was a dog, or a cat, whatever.
Where were they placed? Like at a well or a river?
It was the same
like
bank that people had been buried them. And interestingly enough, the story there was in the 50s, there was just on the land, there were two sisters that lived there that were rumored to be witches, and they were the last ones, and it was the last dig that they had done were around the time these women would have been alive. That's all fantasy, but the point of it is if things like that can exist into our present age, imagine what it was like 600 years ago, 700 years ago, 800 years ago. I think there were a lot of pre-Christian practices still going on. However, I think the pagan, I'm using pagan loosely, but the pre-Christian mind, it had been lost for the most part. Only very well-educated people may have had some sort of connection to that intellectually. However, the practices going on could have been there, and maybe some rural town that used to worship Pan did start worshiping the devil, because
that's the new Pan.
They merged it.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I like about Leland's book. One of the reasons why I find it sort of authentic is because that book mixes Christianity with superstition and pre-Christian things and fairies and Lucifer and Herodias and all these.
Which is what they would have done.
Which seems more likely. Yeah. It seems like that's what really happened.
So, in my mind, and I'm sorry if I cut you off, Levi. We do tend to do that. The whole idea of this is that I don't think witchcraft is pre-Christian. And I don't mean that in the sense that Gerald Gardner made it all up, so of course it's not pre-Christian. I mean that the whole idea, the system built around it, the mythology built around it, is something that is a reincarnation of the old pre-Christian mystery cults or beliefs that has been reformulated within a Christian ethos.
Exactly.
Am I saying that correctly? And I think that that's relevant today because whether we like it or not, we still live in a Christian society. This is not the land of the mother goddess in state.
Right.
Yet. No, you're right. Before Christianity, we would not have been witches.
Right.
In pagan Britain, we would have been druids.
We would have been priests.
If we were in Rome, we would have been priests or priestesses of something. Like we would have been flamens or flamina or whatever. Like
there was no pre-Christian people using the word witch. In that way.
In this way, no.
Yeah.
No.
I just think we encounter so many seekers today who really deeply associate modern witchcraft with pre-Christian witchcraft, that it really looked like that, and that they use the word witch.
Problem is that their fantasies are bigger than ours.
That's that is such a good point.
But that's where they're just picking up on their history class or whatever, and that seems like the mainstream idea out there.
It is very weird, but like you're right, the fantasy has got, like, if ours was the original lie, if it is a lie, which I don't think it is, but if ours was the original lie, the lie didn't get smashed by the pagan community. They took that and ran with it and made it so much bigger and weirder than it was.
I think in the mission statement to try to be authentic, people sort of moved away from, they all made that up in witch trials, what have you. The thing about the witch trials is what they prove, and I know that that's later for the most part, but what that proves is the common beliefs that these people had about witchcraft. I think they're very valuable to look at, anyway. So once again, we are a call-in show.
We have some.
Oh, right.
Yes, I saw it earlier and I was letting you finish. Hi, you're on Covendom. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. How are you all doing?
Doing well. What's your name?
Ashton here.
Nice, Ashton. Do you have a question?
Ashton's called in before.
I think so too.
Oh yeah, I chime in every now and then, when the blood pressure hits right.
Perfect. Love that. So what's your question, Ashton?
So I actually had two questions. My first question is, so we're talking about the medieval aspect of witchcraft, the historical, egregore, the atmosphere, and everything of it.
Yeah.
What would you say is I wouldn't say relevance because it seems a bit, skewed, but what is the significance to modern contemporary witches to understand medieval witchcraft as it was presented, as it's understood, been
Okay.
reviewed academically, everything like that? How does that influence our craft today, be that we solitary or a member of an initiated tradition?
So I just spoke, so I don't know.
I think I'll make a mind part real quick. I think that, obviously, like any other answer I'm going to give, people who are identifying as a witch now may come at it from many different places. So from my vantage point, when I look at my journey as a witch, when I look at the books that I've read, when I look at my current practices, I think that the mythos surrounding worshipping the old European god who began to be called the devil and worshipping the nocturnal magical moon goddess is still very relevant to the craft today. I think obviously the magical side of it and the counterculture side of it, the forbidden aspects of it, in some senses the heretical aspects. I think the journey, of most practitioners now is that they want to live, I prefer to live in the opulence of a pristine Egyptian or Greco-Roman temple, but my witchcraft isn't always there. Sometimes my witchcraft is running free and wild in the woods. So there's a vast history of the craft and the things that we practice, but that spirit of the witch, that idea, that it still exists there in our minds, and so I think there's a lot of relevance to it. It's a part of our history. It's a part of European culture.
What about you, Elie?
I'll say three things, and they might not be quite what you're asking, but they were the things that came into my brain.
And speak up just a little.
I love the heretical idea. I agree. When I was little and people were talking to me about Christianity, I immediately said, I don't like it. It doesn't make sense. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And luckily I was in a secular household and we weren't asked to do religion growing up, but other people around me were doing it. And I said, no, I'm not picking that. I'm going to do something else, something more weird than that. So I really love medieval witchcraft because I think it was heretical. Two other things I thought of. I believe in witchcraft reincarnation, and so I think today, really a lot of people drawn to modern witchcraft have experienced it from a past life in many time periods, and probably in the medieval period. Makes sense to me. And then the other last thing is the egregores. I do believe there are long-term living beings, I don't even know what they would be called, that manage witchcraft. I'll just use that word really generally. And those of us who practice it that are a continuation from ancient times to today.
Yeah.
And we ask to link up with those, whether we call those by our god and goddess names or some sort of other teaching being or protective being. I think they're different for witches, and I think their heads rose during different periods of time, and they certainly were there for the witches in the medieval period. And I think we remember it. I think we still have access to those beings.
So, Ashton, I'll say this. I think I'll say this. I have a passion for studying a lot of sort of historical things that is solely born out of interest. It doesn't necessarily reflect as a necessary foundational practice for my religion. What I will say, though, is I do think that there is something very useful in understanding the sort of mythos of medieval witchcraft and how it developed throughout the church's persecutions during the witch trials and then their own rejections of those persecutions. I think that is...
Christians.
I know, I think that it's useful because it is me having a touchstone mythology. It's not, I don't want to be too literal. There's this thing that, the historical Jesus movement, where people like Grossman and a couple other famous, John Dominic, what is his name? Crossan. That's it, Crossan. They were obsessed with this idea of what did the real Jesus believe? What did the real St. Paul believe? The funny thing is that makes for good conversation and terrible church. So all of their churches emptied out. Like John Shelby Spong is another example of this. You know, it inspires no one. Like nobody goes to their services. They go to hear them give a lecture at Duke Divinity or whatever, but they're not actually participating in the Anglican faith anymore. So I think it's a touchstone mythology, but I'm not actually particularly interested in whether or not I think certain people in my lineage were initiated by certain people who ad infinitum trace themselves back to somebody who was in a secret cult of Diana, right? I believe that in a spiritual way, in a mythological way. I do believe that's true on that level. But whether or not I can prove it through court records doesn't interest me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh yes, definitely. I mean, that's one of those aspects where they're transitioning beyond the esoteric and they're going exoteric, and they're trying to find, you know, these outside aspects to prove themselves. And I'm like, that's not the point of religion or spirituality, you know.
Correct.
If we want to go in that sense.
Especially initiatory religion, right?
It becomes irrelevant at a point. You know, it doesn't matter to me either. I mean, I have my fantasies about it, and I love my fantasies, but I know that there's a point in which, you know, there's just certain things we don't know. But I love being open to the possibility. I don't like to say, well, that's just superstitious, or that couldn't have possibly been.
I like superstition.
I could see a group of people in the woods in merry old England worshipping the devil, not knowing what they're doing, making it up as they go along.
Or maybe they're fully aware and proud of it.
Maybe so.
I'm fine with that too.
Maybe so.
Does that answer your question, Ashton?
Oh, definitely. I did have a second question.
Sure.
So I've been tuning in a lot, and with the Witchcraft and Mythology episode, or, you know, whatever other ones, we've kind of touched on the importance of both art and language within witchcraft. So be it we looking at the ancient woodcuts, you know, what we would call ancient, but, you know, woodcuts, the art of witchcraft and how witches have been depicted in art, but both the language. So, you know, we go to a public ritual and someone is saying, you know, thou art goddess, thy, you know, there's an embodiment of that. Or be we in media where, you know, the abundance of Latin is, you know, conveyed, you know,
Magic's
Buffy, whatever the show is, Latin is, you know, important. So what could modern witches or contemporary witches today benefit from an understanding of both art and language, and how could we discern, you know, what is true witchcraft? Because I think the majority of us, you know, once we join in at that young age, solitary, you know, it's like, oh, let's, you know, see what Charmed is doing, Buffy's doing, let's see, you know, what these books are saying. And it's abundance of, you know, Latin or whatever kind of thing it is.
And a very, like, stock collection of images, triquetras, pentagrams.
Just scales,
Yeah, it's a very specific thing. Right?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, when it comes to art, I think it's an important thing that just so many people don't actually look at. Like, I, you know, talk about the blood pressure going right. Every time I hear someone say, Gerald Gardner made up being skyclad because he was a nudist, I think, what about all the woodcuts of naked witches? What about all the pre-Christian statues of naked people and gods and goddesses? He, you know, he may have embraced it, but
it's not a new concept.
No, not at all. Leland talked about it, right? So, well, he didn't talk about it, but he put it in that book, or had it put in the book. I'm not going to get into that right now. You know, I think this is an authentic woodcut on this book, probably.
That's Durer, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember right now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, it's art. It's a different way of talking, and we're talking about a period when so many people were illiterate. Art really told a story that, you know, that matters, you know, and I certainly think that that's true today. I mean, even in my social media outlet, when I want to sort of capture people's ideas about witchcraft, posting an old black and white picture of Alex and Maxine sparks more interest to people than any sort of blog post I could put out, because it captures a whole story in that image, and it doesn't look like the things that they're coming across today, and so they want to know more and they begin asking questions. You know, I think that's true of that day. For some people, maybe the only thing they knew about witchcraft were pictures they may have seen.
Yeah.
You know, or stories they've been told, you know.
Yes.
So I think that's just a huge part of history in general that we should always look at, expression. And as a magical person, I think art is a medium for magic. It is called the art magical, right? As far as how it's relevant today, I mean, I think that's always a complicated answer because, when you're looking at Gardnerian and Alexander witchcraft, I think it's already influenced us. I think you can clearly find it in our DNA. However, there's movements today of people that I like to call trial record witches, and they're trying to be more authentic than Gardnerians and Alexandrians, and they're going purely off of that and trying to, reconstruct something else. And then we've got the people trying to be pre-Christian, and of course we've got the people who just want to cast spells. So I think if you're really interested in the subject of witchcraft, I think any point in its history would be of interest to you.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
I'm going to pass it to Elie because I think I have one really big thing I want to say is you asked Ashton, what do we do? Like, for example, it used to be that Latin spoke to people because it felt so powerful.
I am a fan of Latin.
But that is fading, the further we get away.
And I feel like people attribute themselves to wanting something external, be that a language,
Here's what
Latin seems more powerful, and I'm like, there's power in English as well.
Oh, Latin is beautiful. I love Latin personally, but Latin's only going to be powerful if you're going to go become a trad Catholic. They're the only people who care about it anymore. Here's what I'll say.
I have to understand I'm a fully Romanized Catholic.
Yes. If you want to know where I think language could be a source of something powerful moving forward for witchcraft, it's this. Even initiates in the public sphere have forfeited the language of belief. We're an exception to this and we're a rare one. I know lots of published initiates, I'm not going to call anyone out or anything, I love them all, but who use the language of the non-believers. If I could pick on one thing about the power of language for the future of craft, it's stop ceding ground.
Stop ceding the narrative.
Stop ceding the narrative. Use the language of belief. I tell people all the time, no, I'm religious. I'm not spiritual. I'm religious. I'm a member of a religion. I believe in God. I pray. I use the word prayer. I'm not forfeiting any of this. I use the word magic. I use the word spell. I use the word witchcraft.
use the word witch.
I'm not forfeiting
It's a lot like when a believer goes up against an atheist and they're like, here's my opinion, but they're always conveying themselves within the atheist dynamic and within the atheist language.
Yeah,
so it's like you've kind of defeated yourself
100%.
As opposed to communicating.
No, my advice, start crazy. Go full blown. don't cede an inch to these people.
We started
Go
crazy.
Full blown. Right?
Is that us?
No.
That's what I want to say about language and art. I use what drives my emotions, particularly in ritual. We use a lot of sort of copied Old English liturgy, with thee and
Levi
thy.
literally dresses like this.
Right.
Sometimes.
Our jewelry, our costume.
Only at church.
Our decoration of the temple, our decoration of outside spaces for certain rituals. We're using all kinds of imagery from the past because it stirs us. It brings out our emotions. We love the feeling that it creates in us. We're not trying to be currently accurate and only use proper American English today and only use modern artwork. That wouldn't really...
That'd be so boring.
That would be so boring for
Have
me.
you ever been to one of those rituals though, where they're so bland that it's meaningless? Yes, where they're just like, dear great figure.
No, they got to read it off of a paper.
Yeah, they read it off a paper. It can't be the great mother because you offend too many people. And it's just like, the energy that holds together but does not contain. It's like always some sort of contingency.
It's like, why are you even there?
Who would
why
worship
are you even
that?
there? Yeah.
That's exactly.
Yeah, so could we say that, quote, old language has a power to itself and we're honoring that and conveying it?
I mean, I think it definitely does. It's like, I'm a fan. Language is written language, is spoken language, the song, the poem, the picture, the dance. All of this art is a part of the human creative process, and magic is a creative process.
Yeah. But I loved both
so
those
is
questions.
Religion, really.
So thank you for calling in with those questions, Ashton.
Oh, yes, definitely. Thank you all for answering and everything. I hope you have a lovely night.
You as well.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
I just have to say I have no idea who Ashton is, but he sounds extremely attractive.
Oh, Brian. Oh, Brian.
Nice
Yeah,
voice,
Francis in the comments, Francis Billinghurst, Francis said, I don't understand a form of witchcraft that doesn't include deity. I have to agree. I'm not a big fan of modern atheistic witchcraft. It's very foreign to me.
I don't believe in it. So.
Is it do people do it really? Is it a big thing?
Well, people,
yeah.
people identify as being spell casting, which is...
Yeah, they don't believe in anything divine.
But that's not a religion, that's just operative, right? Or whatever you're going to say, magical practice.
Yeah.
Why is it
Yeah.
witchcraft? They're just calling it that.
Because they're just calling it that, yeah.
Because they want to, I don't know.
Identify.
I don't know why they do it, but that's what they want.
So I wanted to say something because Hector is talking about like growing up multilingually and how, the prayers in
Stop
different
bragging,
languages.
Hector.
Well, no, it reminds me of, do you remember that initiate we met in Portugal who said they tried to do part of our liturgy in Portuguese and then we're like, no, it only rang correctly for in English.
Oh, I was speaking to the one that looked like Pan. What is his
Yes.
name? Anyway, I'm pretty sure he's out of the broom closet, but I won't say his name even though I can't remember it anyway. So yes, there is a rule in craft that the Book of Shadows has to be copied exactly the way that it is, and that includes being English.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I was taught, or the way I know of it. Did I unplug a light with my?
You literally did.
Oh, we look better though.
Look, this is Covendom after dark.
I think we look better on here. I don't know if we will know. The rituals have to be practiced in English. They have to be practiced in English. They cannot be translated. The book cannot be translated.
Right.
And that actually harkens back to a rule in Eleusis. In Eleusis, the two rules were you had to be able to speak Greek, and you had to be able to, and you couldn't be a murderer. Those were the two things. So, and the reason why is to be able to speak Greek in order to understand and perform the rituals.
Yep.
So the rituals in Gardner and Alexandrian craft are in British, but I decided to play the devil's advocate, and I said, well, why couldn't they be translated? Why not? And he said, because they don't really translate. They don't mean the same thing.
Now, the French have a saying, to translate is to commit treason.
Yeah.
Traduire, c'est trahir.
So he was, yeah. And I've heard witches in other countries say, I think one of my friends said, I'm the best witch here because I can speak English.
Yeah, it's like, because it sounds differently in the language, yeah.
I remember that conversation.
That's true in a lot of religions, though. I mean, up until Vatican II, the Latin, the Mass had to be in Latin, and in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church still often uses Old Church Slavonic instead of modern Russian.
I'm sure.
So, it's a thing.
I'm sure by someone who had a strong grasp of both languages, it could be done to some degree. But right now that's as it stands, and that's we do copy the Book of Shadows exactly, so it's copied in English.
People like this lighting. So we do.
Does the lighting look better? I think
like
it
the
does.
lighting.
People like it on here. So like I said, it looks like Covendom after dark. Like this is when the real truth comes out.
Apparently, I unplugged something with my foot.
So we do have a caller. Hi, Lillian.
Hi, Levi. This is a new screwy cell phone. Am I too loud or too soft? Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine. What was your question, Lillian?
Okay. I'm hearing echo, but I can hear you. I had maybe an odd question, but just whoever wants to answer, or all of you, would just be groovy. What you were recently speaking about, I love the caller's questions. This was great. But about language use, I was sitting here, my eyes were getting big listening. When you were saying, it would be great if people would stop, giving ground and start using the language of belief rather than the language of disbelief. I totally, wholeheartedly agree with that. And just a weird question. I had a thought. Do any of you think some people doing their ritual, again, whatever they may call themselves, there are so many people out there, do you think some of them make things more bland, dissect it verbally, you know what I mean, really making it as if they don't believe the very thing they're doing when they're speaking in ritual? Do you think you might do this in some cases because they fear that if they put their whole heart and emotion, everything into it, something really might happen.
I'll tell you.
That's an odd question, but
Absolutely, I agree with you. The devil might actually show up, right?
yeah.
My partner, Lillian, struggles with this. He made a joke one time where he was like, I always like to dip my toe, in Buddhist philosophy or in, the occult or whatever, but I can't totally give it over because I have this like leftover Christian fear, right? That if I totally, it's almost like they think that they could still argue with Jesus. Like if they die and they show up and it's him, they could be like, well, I didn't really say it. I didn't really go, as if you could lawyer your way out of the fire, right? I do think that's part of it, Lily, and I think they're too afraid to commit.
I'd be like, well, you should have written a better book.
Exactly.
Should have been more interesting.
What about you, Elie?
I think it has to do with comfort with yourself. I think we're all trying to sort of, we're not all. Some people are trying to hold back from really powerful religious experience. And
Agreed.
if they're dissecting the language and holding their emotions at bay and keeping their rational mind on top of it and looking at it as they do it, then they really aren't immersing their body and soul into the ecstasy and into the work of the ritual. And there's a place where we even saw the language goes away. It could just be howling and grunting.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I just
and
love
you're
Hector's
making that
comment.
powerful connection, which is what our goal really is, to make the
Well,
powerful
I was just
connection.
going to say what was coming to my mind, and it sounds bad, but it's true. I don't care about those people, and I do everything at great cost to avoid them.
Yes. I love Hector's comment as if I was just playing Jesus. I was just playing. I didn't mean it. I mean none of it. But no, I agree, Lily, and I think a large.
I detest public rituals for that very reason. The ones that we do, I think, because of how much I dislike other ones, turn out okay.
People love them.
But it's because I try to avoid all that nonsense and
You do
reading
avoid
off
the
a paper
nonsense.
and trying
We
to
don't do it that
placate
way.
people. Witchcraft is not for the masses, nor is it here to placate
Thank God
people.
it's not for the masses.
And I don't believe any religion or any person's religious beliefs needs to be explained to someone in any great depth. It exists. That's why we've got so many religions.
And it can't be explained.
You know, I'm not a
Right.
Buddhist. I don't want to be a Buddhist. You know, I don't trust any god who's fat and tells you to fast.
The real Buddha was not.
And
that's Hote.
I just, there's something about those smiling ones that really freak me out. But the point of it is, I'm not a Buddhist. There may be things I respect about it, but it's not the religion for me. Likewise, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Hare Krishna. So there's all these religions and beliefs and forms of occult that people can practice. Find the one that works for you, or do what so many people do and make up your own strange version. But don't expect me to apologize to you for how I believe or to dumb my rituals down for you. And that's the problem, is these people want to be included in something. And I think is what it is because so many people are disenfranchised with the church. They're trying to fill the vacuum, but you've got large amounts of sheep trying to be shepherds and refusing to have a shepherd, and they're in massive groups acting like sheep. Their rituals are the rituals of sheep. Follow me.
How quaint. Even the rabbits.
So, I think that's probably why. It's why some people are serving pomegranate arbor mist at their spring equinox rituals
Oh.
with bubble lumps.
But does that answer your question, Lillian?
Arbor mist burn.
Yeah. yes, definitely. And yes, the words I'm really exhausted today. I was almost going to say dumbing it down. It's like the very thing that means everything. Why in the name of any of the gods would you want to dumb it down? It's like hitting yourself in the head with a brick. It's killing everything. It's
Agreed.
Yeah. Anyway.
I don't think
Yes,
they're dumbing
thank
it
you.
down. I think they're doing their best. I think where Levi's point is that we do have certain people, from our vantage point, that we see dumbing it down because they're trying to placate the masses, whether it's for popularity or whether it's for money or whatever the case may be. It's the wrong way of going around it. People, if you want to look at the money side, look at Marilyn Manson and Madonna. They didn't dumb anything down, which is why they were so successful, even though they had massive amounts of haters. You know, it's or me, and Christian for that matter. As far as religious is concerned, it's it's people, the park pagans. You know, they just want to be in a social club. You know, they're not really doing it. Most of them aren't doing
They're
it.
not really doing religion.
They're not doing it for the gods. They're not really devoted to anything. They're not actually trying to work the arts magical. It's a way of relating to people, and it's filling in that vacuum that has been left by the church.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's really stepped in to fill it, and I hate to tell people, witchcraft isn't going to do it.
No.
We're not here for that sort of social vacuum. But the label can be used, as we know, by anyone for anything.
Absolutely. But thank you again, Lillian, for
Did
calling
you have
in. Very
another
good
question?
Did you have another question, Lillian?
Oh, no, that was it for now. If I think another one before you're done, I'll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Bye.
You know,
Bye.
I'm not trying to pick on anyone. It's just that's been my experience. You know, since I got into the world of witchcraft, in every city I've lived in, there's always been what I call the park pagans, and they are the Scott Cunningham generation. And you know, I think now they like to be heathens and things like that.
They do. Very good thing.
It's a social thing. It's 2 clicks away from being like a Rin fair or something. Nothing wrong with it, but it has nothing to do with my religion, nor does it fulfill my religious needs to attend.
No.
It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing. So I thought I would, where we didn't see any questions at the end of the comments there, and I liked those questions, I might ask a couple of you all to bring it back to the original topic of the medieval witch cult, and its sort of continuation or inspiration for modern initiatory witchcraft.
I've got a question for Levi. Is
Go.
everyone ready? He'll love this question. Because you didn't really talk too much. I think you sort of seeded it to be polite. But because Levi's got a lot he could say on it. So,
I do.
Okay. So this is a kind of a difficult question to ask and a difficult question to answer because there's so many ways you could look at it. So as we know, the narrative within the craft has always been that the witches were accused of worshipping the devil, but really it was the horned god, right?
Yes.
That's what we still teach people. And it is absolutely factual that through Europe, right? Throughout Europe, they were describing predominantly the devil as being black, red, or blue, having horns, sometimes hair, horns, a tail, a pitchfork, but usually at least horns, and being sort of, hooves or whatever. That same devil that we all grew up in, the Halloween devil, the red devil with the pitchfork, we all know what it looks like, right? This isn't in the Bible, as Levi's clearly stated. So
Correct.
this is obviously something that was a universal belief to some degree, though, that this is what the devil looked like. So much so that it came through to the present day. So, nowadays, some of the would-be academics like to point out that there was no one horned god, right? There was no one horned god. So there was many horned gods. But if we want to be historians, we have to realize that horned gods were not necessarily the top of the totem pole in all these pantheons.
No.
So how is it that this image of the horned god became so universal when Pan wasn't overly that popular towards the end of the Roman era, that Cernunnos wasn't overly popular towards the end of the... So where did this image really come from, in your opinion?
I think a couple of things. I think number one is the devil, and I think there was a conflation of the devil with goats. This part is a little biblical. There is the scapegoat, and all of that, and the fact separating the sheep from the goats. That's very biblical. So I do think that you have a little bit of that. I think most of our image of the war in heaven comes from Paradise Lost, which is hilarious because it's a poem and has nothing to do with scripture. But as for the horned god becoming the sort of triumphant image, I think in a way it goes back to the original thing you were speaking about, which was Christianity created this very unique environment where something was remembered, but then it was preserved in this magical way, which is what we believe. And so you have the goddess, but she's hidden. She's the queen of Elfame, or she's the queen of the dead sometimes, or she's the queen of the
Witches.
Yeah, queen of the witches, or they call her the Madonna Oriente, the lady from the east, which is a big one in certain witch trials. I think the devil is no different.
So you're saying the horned god was universal, it was just the devil.
Kind of, yeah.
Not the devil from the Bible, everyone.
No, I think the medieval folk devil, I think basically became a god.
I think it's also, my theory is that there are certain images people don't talk about very often. Like every author says it goes to Pan, right?
Yeah.
Very unlikely, we know
But
that.
Serapis.
Right? Yes. Serapis.
The pitchfork.
Serapis was more widespread at that point in history. So when one of the last mystery cults to exist was the cult of Isis and the cult of Mithra. And there were conflations between these two cults. There's a temple in London that you can go see that's a temple of Mithra, right? But in that temple of Mithra, they found a statue of Serapis and a statue of Isis. So these things were kind of, joining like all the other mystery cults. So the image of Hades being basically conflated with Osiris.
And the serpent.
He was symbolized as a snake, a pitchfork, and
goat.
Horns. I think the church probably grabbed onto this because it was a scarier image, than Apollo would have been. Right.
Than a fallen angel, than a beautiful angel of light.
Yes. But I think Levi is also right that and so were the early witches. What we've always taught the general public was that the devil that was being worshipped in these stories was really the old horned god. And by hook or by crook, I think that's sort of true.
I do too. Because it's not the same one as the Bible. Would you agree, Elie? It's just not biblical.
I think, no, I don't think it's biblical. And I think most people agree it's the horned god.
Well, and you met him once.
My personal experience is very different. In my early childhood, before kindergarten.
Are we going to really go there?
Yes.
The way she just went, yes, we are.
The being that came to me at the foot of my bed was, first of all, human, not animal. And I knew immediately that it was the devil, even though I had really little exposure, by like age 3 and 4, little exposure to Christianity, no exposure to classical witchcraft. We didn't have a television. This was in 1968. Probably we were read myths out loud, and my brother and I had some records of old myth stories. That was just kind of how we were entertained in the evening. So it's possible that in some of that material I got some ideas about the devil. But I believe the devil is an entity, a being, that it's more related to humanity, that it's an egregore. It's been existing a really long time. It's probably a merger of some things. Maybe the horn god, maybe the Catholic Church sort of added to that. But I think it's a very unique and special being.
It has a foot fetish.
Not for me. It doesn't have a foot fetish for me. But I knew and I was terrified. I'm not going to say that I went, oh, look, it's the devil at the foot of my bed. No. I was pretty damn scared. But and it happened repeatedly a lot until I got a handle on it. I thought...
And you didn't have any bizarre uncles?
I had a lot of weird family members, no doubt about it. But I was a really psychic kid. I was a really psychic kid, so a lot of different things were happening in my psychic vision and auditorily all the time. I mean, I was really troubled by it as a little kid. I remember feeling, he came to me. He came to me. It means I'm special and there's something else going on and I don't have to participate in this religious cultural paradigm that surrounds me. I was born in Florida in the South. I mean, it's just a strong culture.
Christianity is very
thick
powerful.
On you,
He chose you, Rosemary.
He chose
you above all others.
It is zero.
And I didn't know why.
God.
I didn't know why. But I mean, I have a very distinct
We're not trying to
experience.
sit here and convince you that we're all secretly Satanists. I promise you that
No, and it was
We're
not
not.
Satan. It was not Satan.
no.
It was not a biblical or Christian devil in any way. It was a specific, different being who I'm
And I
still
think-
friends
I think
with. Still really love the devil.
The medieval devil
Who is different than Pan for me. That's another being. I like him a lot too.
is a different egregore than what's in... I mean, the devil you read about in here,
It's not biblical.
There's nothing
No.
in... The devil you read about in here wants to give you magical powers, wants to possibly have sex with you.
Yes.
And worshipping him consists of things like that. So it's not anything to do with.
No, the biblical Satan has nothing to do
And
with the
he's the
folkloric
rebel, too.
devil.
He's the rebel. He's the other one that says, you don't have to do what they tell you. You can come hang out with me. I like you. That's me. That's the devil.
No,
for
that
me.
rebellion is very much a part of it. But yeah, it does absorb a lot from history. I think, taking it back to our topic, I do think that a lot of the medieval witch cult's entire point, honestly, is not to be so literal as some people like to make it. Because people throw that at me sometimes with like, J.R. Gardner made it all up. And I'm like, I could care less. I mean, I could not care less, excuse me. I don't believe that, but I also am not going to give them the power for that to be the linchpin of my entire religious experience. Like, okay, and and oftentimes, you know what the real response is when they're yelling these things at you? I'm sorry you're not initiated, because that's usually what they're mad about. Honestly, they're just mad that they're not in the club.
Don't need it.
They're just mad they're not in something. It's just FOMO and bitterness.
No, they're mad that you are.
Gross. Like, I don't...
But the devil came to me before I ever heard about Gerald.
Okay, enough about the devil.
No, that's why I know it's real.
Look at Patrick. Patrick's in the comments talking about when I called him out for like trying to still be friends with Jesus, like in case Jesus is real. Listen, Jesus. Here's the thing. I made
Patrick, the secret is to get extremely offended and demand flowers and jewelry.
From Jesus?
From you.
Please. So, ask us a question, Ellie.
It works for me.
It does work for you. I just put you do it now. Give us an oracle.
What's happening?
I don't know. He's asking me a question. I don't have.
No,
any
I said
questions.
ask us a question.
Ask me a question.
Oh.
Okay. No, this is something I thought of earlier today. Now, why in Alexandrian tradition could we be more specifically interested in medieval witchcraft? What's the link there?
Well, I think that
Because you said we always want to bring it back to
the early, Alexandrian Gardnerian tradition, had a different vantage point than we do now originally. People like Gerald Gardner, Doreen, Alex and Maxine. I'm not speaking for any of them, but they were from an era where, in a sense, things were a little purer. There wasn't all these intellectual cobwebs in the faith.
Right.
And things were new and fresh. And so, they would have been looking at all of these things for, the cult of witchcraft. How old was it? Where were its resources? What could they learn from it? And I think we're still doing that today. I think people have just overcomplicated it with... I think the problem is that you have this movement, which is pretty prevalent, with people trying to prove that they're intelligent and to almost apologize for their religious beliefs.
Right.
Like, I'm not actually superstitious.
Right.
I don't actually believe in like superstitious things. I'm not uneducated. So in order to prove that I'm educated, I'm going to sort of dissect everything about what I'm doing and apologize for it and repackage it to you in a way that sounds intellectual. Or they'll spend all this time sort of, obsessing over nuances of things. And we all do it to some degree. But when it comes down to like what you're actually doing, I think the relevance of it is that when I look at the medieval witchcraft cult, what I see people who wanted to pursue a path of power and magic, despite possible consequences. I see that they were devoted to a male and a female force that was mysterious, whether or not it was the Queen of Fairies or the Queen of Witches or the devil or both. They were putting their allegiance into a different form of deity other than what was being offered to them by the state.
Yeah.
And they were working this belief system in secret. Whether they were doing it with themselves or with other people, we have all these same things in common. I am devoted to the horn of God and the goddess, of witchcraft, not so different. I am working a religious rite and magical spells and what have you in secret, outside of the norms of society, not really that different. I perform things that are considered conventionally taboo by society.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's my view on sex, whether it's being nude, the sacred orgy, you know, all of those sorts of things, you know, are things that average society is not approving of. You know, worshipping a divine feminine is something that they're not
That's the real
approving
devil
of.
right there.
And
under patriarchy.
And it would have been even more so back then.
They're choosing a woman.
And I think they were more afraid of it, because you are talking at that point that the Catholic Church was like the thing, and they had their celibate priests, which I think started in the 1300s or something like that.
It's older than that, but it's not required in Catholic. Yeah.
But, you know, it was all monks, I think it was, but it's all sort of going on at that point in time. You know, so...
They hate women.
Yes, they hated women, they were afraid of sex, they were afraid of magic, and...
They had all those wet dream problems.
The only difference between me and a medieval witch and my coven and my cult and a medieval one is that at this point in time, I cannot be tried, convicted, and executed by the state.
Yet.
At this moment in time.
Yet.
That's why we need to pay attention to politics.
So
Keep it.
Really be around the corner,
I definitely think that there's a lot in common, you know, common with what we're doing. Whether or not they were completely a fantasy and we're a reality created from fantasy or not is irrelevant to me. Do I think that's true? No, I don't. I think that there really was something going on. I don't have the delusion that it was one big underground cult, you know, but I think I do think there was a lingering cult of Diana in the beginning, and it probably died out, you know, long before its story did.
Yeah, I think what was your question?
How medieval witchcraft relates to Alexandrian witchcraft.
Oh, exactly what Brian said, that we pull from, you know, the constant egregore of the past and therefore have our feet planted in a certain set of images and divine experiences. But I want to go back, I think, to Ashton's question, oddly enough, that he asked about language. And it's come up in the comments, and it's come up in what we're talking about. What I like about taking it back to the image of the medieval witch cult is it was so religious. You signed the book. You prayed to the Queen of the Fae. You went to the secret place under the ground. This is an initiation. That's what it's describing. Like, if you read about Eleusis, we've been, all of us actually, inside of the Telesterion, the reconstructed Telesterion in Athens. You know, it's the same thing. You know, you're going in to be reborn. You're going in to worship something else. I wouldn't give it up for the world, and I do think that medieval witch cult mythos is directly responsible for my experience. It is.
Selling your soul. And terrifying in certain ways, too. And you have to walk into that ecstasy and that emotion. You can't really go back out when you go down into the ritual, too.
No.
You really
once you do cross a point
over.
Where you've crossed over, and I think medieval imagery gives that to us.
And now we no longer care about the false god of the Christians.
Taking it to Sabrina all the way.
I never even think like that. Do you? I'm never thinking about that
No.
our devil is related
When
to
people ask me,
No, but I'm very careful about how I word it, only because it could so easily be confused, because the last thing we want to do is encourage the Christians that we really are devil worshippers. You know, we're not.
No.
You know, our devil is much older than their Bible. I didn't quite sound right today.
I know.
Well, it's true, though.
That's right.
But I also will say,
that's right.
I will say, it's also just not relevant. When people ask me, I have like Christian family, obviously.
I mean, I do consider Pan and the devil to be the same thing, but I get what Elie's saying, the energy, you know, if you're going to take it into aspects of things.
Yeah.
The devil's more forbidden to us, but, you know, in medieval times, the Pan would have been just as forbidden.
Really?
You know, this naked goat guy running around wanting to have sex with people.
But I no more worry about Jesus or the devil than I worry about Shi Wang Mu, worshipped by millions of people, as you know, in China.
I don't have a salvation of the soul belief system. So I think you're all going to be okay no matter what you do.
I think so.
Yeah. I do believe, oddly enough, in some kind of salvation, like salvation from mundanity, salvation from a shitty reincarnation.
Well, I believe in salvation.
I just finished a book.
I believe in salvation from boredom.
Yes.
I think your heart gets weighed against a white feather and possibly
a book that you both would love,
crocodiles.
talking about something that's continuing through. It's called Ritual Text of the Afterlife, and it's an examination. It's by Sarah Ellis Johnston, who wrote the book on Hecate Sotera, and Franz Grift, German last name. But it's about Orphism and the tablets they were buried with, the golden tablets of the Orphic religion, the mystery religion of Dionysus. And it was their instructions to make sure that they got better reincarnations. And it would always be like, the regular people are going to drink from the river of memory, but I love what it says. You would go before the guards when you died by a white cypress, and they would look at you and be like, you have to drink from the river of Lethe, forgetfulness. And you were supposed to say, no, I'm an initiate. I am a child, and this is an exact quote from the tablets, I am a child of the earth and the starry sky, and I will drink from the river of memory. And the guards would let you go drink from the river of memory, and then you went to the Elysian fields, and you could choose your own incarnations eventually.
I'm going to make one of those gold tablets for my chest.
You know, they were buried with them.
I'm going to be buried in a...
And we're all going to go try that, and the guy is going to look at it and say, that's nice, boo, get in
I'm
the river.
going to be buried in a green cemetery. My whole family
Christian, it's
has
texts for the afterlife.
My whole family
Text-
has
oh, he knew what it was,
a
yeah.
mound at Glendale Memorial Nature Preserve. And so my mother already has her coffin built, and she's decorating the inside with Egyptian paintings. I haven't built my coffin yet. I think I'm going to use a shroud, but I am going to be
Did
buried.
she make her own coffin?
She had it built out of pine because it's
Okay.
a no chemical, no metal even. Everything has to be able to deteriorate.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be buried with my Book of Shadows and 2 or 3 other things and some instructions on reincarnation. So now I know exactly what kind of little thing to make for myself.
But if you want to make sure, guys, you remember, tell the guards, I'm not drinking from
I'm
that
a
fountain.
child from the earth and the
and the
starry
starry
heavens.
and the starry sky, and I want to
will
drink from the river of memory.
Okay,
Yeah.
if we have a minute or two, if it's possible, I did bring like 4 books.
I'm
that I
going
want
to look
show.
at them and I say, could you tell my mother I've arrived?
Did you tell my mother? Did you tell my mother I'm here?
Can
Well,
you tell
she'll be
Mama?
there.
Yeah,
She'll
the
be there.
great
Tell my mother
eternal
I've
mother.
arrived.
I like to think of that scene in American Gods. Well, Ellie's is getting this together in American Gods, where the leprechaun comes for the Irish woman, and I like to think that even if the Christians are right, when we die, the god or the goddess is going to show up for us and be like, no, this one goes with me. Like, you can take the rest.
Oh, Anubis is going to be right there by my side.
Oh, I love Nubers.
I'm just going to be like,
Nubers.
When you die, seeing a dog is the most comforting thing you
Yes.
could possibly do. Cause
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
I mean, okay, let me ask you a question. If you died and a cat showed up for you,
I'd be worried. I'd be a little bit worried. I'd be like,
This is true. I have to do mediumship every week at work. And who do I see? I see dogs all the time, and I see domesticated animals like cows, goats, and pigs, because they were with humans a long time. I have seen 0 cats beyond in the land of the dead. 0 cats. That's
Fun
why
fact,
I would be very
you just told a
upset.
ton of people who love their cats that your cats are
I'm
gone
not saying
forever.
no.
Like,
No.
That's not true either.
I think
Cats
she
have
means
9
they're
lives.
not.
They don't go to heaven and come back. They stay right on the earth plane. They hop into a new body like nobody's business, and they keep right on trucking. They can even take over a cat that's already alive. So it's not that your cat doesn't have
We
a soul,
went down
it's
some
spiritual.
rabbit holes.
It just doesn't have to go up
oh,
to
I
that
have book
space.
recs too, if that's
What's
what we're
the
ending.
idea?
I just wanted to show, how are we doing on time? I just wanted to show
I
what
think ending with book recommendations is a great idea.
I'm a
I already
book
did
person.
mine.
You
So,
did. You
Discovery
did.
of Witchcraft, this book. Another one that I'm going to recommend is Margaret Murray's 2 books, Witchcult, Western Europe, and God of the Witches. And if you've never read them, don't have an opinion about them. They
Small
are.
paperbacks too.
They are.
They're not hard to
They're
read.
old.
They're old.
They're old anthropological works.
Yep.
They are outdated. Guess what? So are all the other anthropological books written in that time period. But there's a lot of valuable information in them anyway. So I recommend you read it.
Okay.
All right.
What about you, Ellie? Because I have
This
some too.
This is actually a 6-book set. Okay.
I have this
and
set.
I call it. I call
I
it
can't see
forever.
it
I've called
now.
it the Brink Angaloo, but it's Brink Ankarloo. Okay. They're all academics, anthropologists, historians, etc., linguists
Let me see.
who have written this series called Witchcraft and Magic. I brought the one titled The Period of the Witch Trials and the one titled The Medieval
I
Period.
don't think I've read these.
There's 6 of them.
Unless
In
they have
fact,
different
you
covers.
You have one in the shop now.
We have
But
the
Are they newer?
They
Helen,
have
no.
the 6
Oh.
books are ancient Greece and
I don't know
Rome,
these covers.
the biblical period, the medieval period, the witch trials periods, and then the 18th and 19th century and the 20th century. Those are the 6, and these are
It's a good
wonderful series to kind of wrap your head around the entire history of magic so far.
I don't
in the
like the
Western
way they
world.
did the headers.
I know.
Christian
That's
is
a
literally
good-
shopping for these books, and he's
Okay.
like, Brian, should we carry them? They're 25% off.
No,
I don't know.
You have one. You have one in in the shop, Christian, but you don't have the whole set of 6. It took me like 5 years to find all 6 of them at some point. This is kind of a cute book, Jeffrey Russell, History of Witchcraft, Sorcerers, Heretics, and Pagans. But I love this because there were so many great art, Ashton, so many great art images from witchcraft around the world and through Europe that really just inspired me.
I've seen this before.
This
somewhere.
book I got recently,
Ooh.
like 2 years ago, the Book of English Magic.
Can I please put an
Oh, I
addendum
have
on
that
this
one.
one?
You can.
This one literally repeats falsehoods that are so falsifiable.
Guess what? It also doesn't mention Alexander, so I hate it.
It literally says that it literally repeats that Druids built Stonehenge. So
But it shows chapter by chapter what is the common thinking, okay? And it says that it's representing the common
it literally
thinking.
says Druids built Stonehenge, unless he updated it.
And this one I brought to see what.
Makes me so angry.
Sorry, Elie.
So no, I know.
This one's good though.
This is great.
This is what I want to ask because they have mixed ratings on Hutton.
I just think
Hutton.
he's somewhat flawed. I like him.
But
I don't like
book,
him, but I like
The
him.
Pagan Religions of the Ancient
I don't
British
dislike him. I don't have
Isles
an opinion.
is a
Don't
really
like his
good-
hair.
No one
I think
likes
he
his
should shave.
hair.
Oh my God, Ellie, finish. I have book recommendations too.
A great, really well done factual
one
book
likes his
on the history of magic in England. No one likes
Those
it.
I love those. I'm going to recommend a few. One of my biggest ones, and I've mentioned him quite a few times on the show, are the works of Carlo Ginzburg.
Yes.
That's Ginsburg.
He wrote a book called Ecstasies.
Actually amazing.
Just amazing. Deciphering the Witch's Sabbath. He has another one on the Benedati, which are
That's more Italian.
basically a type of
Right.
magical folk in northern Italy.
Italy,
It's phenomenal. He writes micro histories. Carlo Ginzburg is one of my favorite writers about witchcraft. If you're looking for something larger, and the sources we're talking about, Brian Levitt has a collection called the Witchcraft Source Book, which is just the actual sources. There's also one called Witchcraft in Europe. And then it's got dates after the date range after it, but it is edited by last name Peters. That is an excellent one. And then I will also say the books by Emma Wilby are incredible. Emma Wilby is one of my absolute favorites.
She
She has
has
a new one out.
One little soapbox I'm going to go on
She
before
has a
we
couple of articles in this Witchcraft and Magic
Yes,
series.
Emma
She's
Wilby
one of the
has one.
writers.
Emma Wilby has one out right now recently about the Aquilare, which were the Sabbaths in the Basque country and the Basque witchcraft.
I wanna start
That's her
reading about
newest
the
one.
Basques.
I haven't read it yet. But those are some of my favorite ones for medieval witchcraft is source books like Brian Levick's Levack, which is just a collection, Peter's edited edition, Witchcraft in Europe, and then Ginsburg for the theory. Of course, none of this is what I would recommend for modern witchcraft. This is just the medieval witchcraft.
So before we go on, I want to just shatter dreams really quick. So we're talking about medieval witchcraft, which in some way would have been influenced by the memory of pre-Christian peoples and sort of that weird transition as we were swinging into the church having full power, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a time period when there was still pagan religions, pre-Christian religions, and then it swang into this on the other end, right? These places, mostly Europe, were almost all Romanized when that happened. When the Roman Empire fell, most pre-Christian people were influenced by what we would now call Roman paganism.
Right.
Yes, they would have still had their localized beliefs too. We know that the mainland Celts, that there was a influence of Celtic culture within that area of Britain, but they were still Romanized.
Heavily Romanized.
And that's true of everywhere until we get into the Swedish and the Finnish and things like that. Yes.
Romanized.
So when we think about the church talking about something like the goddess Diana, we can't say it's Italian because the goddess Diana was heavily worshipped in Britain. She was heavily worshipped all over the place because she was carried there. So it's not really a big surprise when we think about that something like the horned god would be associated with the country heathen people, because in the Roman mind that would have been Pan and Faunus.
Yeah.
And then of course Serapis was one of the great last gods of the initiates in this Roman thing, and he had horns and a pitchfork and ruled over hell. So,
As you do.
all of these ideas were prevalent. So when we think about the last stand of paganism, whether it's in Britain or Alexandria, Egypt, it was in Roman civilization. When Alexandria fell to the Christians finally, it was Roman Alexandria.
Yes.
Not Egyptian Alexandria. When Britain fell, it was Roman.
Roman Britain.
And then guess what happened? The Roman Catholic Church
Yes.
moved back into Britain
Yeah.
and re-Romanized it. So when we're looking at our occult world and the things we do and why we work planetary magic and things like that the way we do, it's because we are products of Roma. So I'm a Roman Celt.
I mean, that's another thing is if I would love to, this is something I want to research more personally. The Roman Celtic religion is a thing.
Yeah.
Like Epona.
Still a thing.
I mean, like Epona was massive. They took Mithras and then incorporated it with Celtic deities. Sulis Minerva, which we've been to her shrine in Bath. If you've been to Bath, you've been to her shrine. This was a big deal. Like the Romanized Celtic deities were wildly worshipped.
And most of the gods, or most of the goddesses
The
recorded
soldiers.
within the medieval era were Roman French.
Roman, yes.
You know, so
Yes.
whether or not, and some of them may have been, like there's one that's French, I can't remember her name, sounded like it was a bit Latinized. But they're all starts with a B.
Bologna?
Something like that.
No, Bologna's war.
But anyway, these were all, you know, this was the thing. So when we get into our delusions of, you know, the Christians destroyed the Druids are already gone, people.
Yeah.
The Druids were gone before Christianity.
Beli Sama or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Figured you'd know what it was. But, you know, all of these things, you know, Noctilia is an old word for Diana or what have you. Herodias. You know, I realized that she is in the Bible, and I absolutely believe the church used that. However, I think she sounded like an older goddess name. You know, so I don't think the Herodias that people were worshipping, I think the Christians made it sound like that. But there is a theory that is in Paul Hewson's book and Ginsberg's, which I know that Levi's not a fan of, is that it could have been a hybrid name of Hera and Diana. You know, which kind of makes sense if you talk about Queen of the Fairies, because Hera meant queen, right?
Yep.
And so we don't know that for a fact, obviously. But
it is Beli Sama.
But
yeah.
hybrid deities were actually very popular.
Wildly
in those
popular.
things. So it could have been that Herodias was Hera Diana, but then the church used the biblical figure to sort of...
Could also be Hyro Diana, Holy Diana.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think, you know, another period that would be interesting to talk about is the Romantic period, where all these people were painting and writing poetry
Yes.
to pagan goddesses all the
They
time.
were already connecting, weren't
That's right.
they?
Yes,
Right.
and
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it kind of showed that it never went away. So in the 1800s and the
Right.
late 1700s, all the way out to the early 1900s,
I believe
all
in-
these poets are
But
like,
you think
"Oh,
about
Venus,
all those
Diana." Like,
occult
I believe in
groups
certain wealthy,
coming up.
educated families that never went away because they were the ones who kept the classics going.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, if you were wealthy enough, you were educated about the Greek philosophers.
But I want to say this is the difference, though. This is why the medieval witch cult, I think, is more inspiring to us as witches than the
Romantic
the Aeneid,
period.
right, or something, than some purely Roman thing.
Because it's more relatable.
Not only that, it's more initiatory.
Yeah.
All the initiatory cults that exploded in Rome were almost always, not entirely, but almost always foreign. They were Egyptian, Greek, Turkish. They were, you know, what became Turkey. They were not from Rome. The Romans actually went into phases. Sometimes they loved the initiates, and sometimes they hated them because they were against the state. They were too weird, too religious, too special, right? The cult of Isis was persecuted. The cult of Magna Mater, the cult of Hecate. But they were Greek. It was considered foreign, right? So I think we connect to that medieval witchcraft because I don't know how you all feel, but for me, the mythology of it is so initiatory. You go into the woods. There's somebody waiting for you in black. You don't know who they are. There are passwords to get in. It's a secret place.
That's relatable
like,
to what we do.
Yes. It's the journey of the soul. And I think that's
we don't
the
live
closest
in
we
don't
have.
live in a world. I mean, we're pretty fortunate, and I'm practically delusional in the sense that my life is strange compared to most people's. I don't have, you know, my whole world is witchcraft nowadays, so I don't like go into a 9 to 5 where I can't talk about witchcraft. But in the reality of it is, we still live in that world to where you can't just go into any place and start talking about being a witch and have it be received normally. Or,
Right.
you know, there's people who still believe it's not real, it's mythology.
Yep.
There's people a lot of people who still believe it's evil. And even if you said, well, no, I don't worship the devil, I worship a goddess, they're going to be like, you're a Satanist. You know, so that
A lot
still
of people that
exists.
hate you for worshiping a
So,
woman.
yeah, so it's relatable still. You know, it's relatable to the world we live in. my fantasy of living in ancient Egypt and completely worshipping the oldest gods in the world, well, that's not relatable to my life completely now, because back then everyone was doing it.
But the witch cult is.
The witch cult is. Yeah.
That's what my point was. It's like it's the closest initiatory journey we have in our
it
history.
may have been the one that
right?
we don't, things do go bump in the night. There's nothing new under the sun. There've always been people meeting, doing secret magical things that society's not privy to, and that's why they're lost to history.
Yeah, but I think that's
whether or not they called themselves witches, or whether they were, the Hellfire Club or the Masons or whatever. There's it's always been happening.
Or the Rosicrucian Theater.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but do you not sense that there is that certain initiatory feel to
Sure.
a lot of the mythos of the?
We don't,
I felt like that figure that came to me as a child had come to get me to take me to do something that was special and unique.
Yeah.
That I was going to be evolved into this better kind of person. I couldn't have described it as initiation as a little kid, but I knew that it was going to be some sort of
Sure, it wasn't an alien.
No, I know the difference in aliens.
But that's probably what it felt like sometimes at Elusives.
And a lot of a pull to underground. I was going to meet secret beings. I was going to exchange my energy for knowledge of their world, and I was going to get to keep participating in their world. I still feel that way today.
But you said no?
No, I said yes. I said I'm scared to death. I think I'm going to have to ask my parents because I'm a little kid. But well, he didn't stop coming. Was the problem, I just got a better handle on my psychic situation. And then I said, this is my path. I chose it as a very little child. I just had to keep quiet about it for a long time.
But that's probably what it
say that.
Brian's talked a lot about Rome. If we look at the initiatory cults that came to Rome, they were foreign gods.
Well, they were the birth of mystery.
They were foreign gods, though.
I mean, not the birth, but...
Could you imagine if you're a Roman citizen, or even if you're not a citizen, you live in Rome, they're not into foreign cults. They're not. The gods are described as dangerous, violent.
Because they didn't originally have mystery cults.
And you decide that you're going to go... It's very similar to this Christian devil thing. Because if you were in Rome and then you're going to go to the cult of Hecate, this Greek deity, the priest is speaking in Greek. You might not even understand it that well. It's dark. There's lamps. She's got dogs and serpents wrapped around her. Or if it's the cult of Magna Mater and they're castrated priests who are ululating and beating on tambourines and she's surrounded by lions and stuff. You probably would have been as terrified as a Christian.
Oh, the Romans used to get creeped out by the Egyptian animal-headed god.
Oh, they thought it was the weirdest thing ever. Terrifying.
You wouldn't go tell your parents right away at age 5, hey, guess what came to see me in the night last night? No, you wouldn't.
So it's honestly, I think the medieval witch cult is a continuation of that mystery religion experience. Because just like the mystery religion.
We used to get visited by an entity I told my parents was called the Birdman.
Wow.
The Birdman was coming.
Yeah. Let me ask one more quick question. We talked about this a lot. I don't remember us discussing it specifically. Do you believe at all that there could have been actual ritual with a group of people in medieval England or Europe?
I would be completely
with a person
surprised.
dressed as the devil.
Well, I don't know if they were dressed as the devil,
but
I'd be completely surprised if there wasn't. I personally believe it's completely illogical to believe that no one tried it.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Because they kept telling you not to.
I think probably lots of people tried it. And we have some records of people being accused and people being interested in the occult and things like that. So I think it'd be very hard to believe that they didn't try it.
I want to say it's very important to remember not all of the accused were, there's this myth that all the accused were just purely innocent people who did. Right. There are actually quite a few examples of people who were
defiant
and religious about it.
Alice Kittler in Ireland.
Right.
I can't remember that one, but there's one
She's
book.
the one who said, I am, and blah, 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 and she escaped to England. The rest of her quote-unquote coven died, but she was wealthy, and she ended up escaping to England. She was let go at one point, and then left the country.
There's one called...
Whether she really was or not, who knows?
The Shaman of Oberdorf. It's a mini history about a man who went through the witch trials in Germany, who claimed to have spoken to angels and spirits, and he believed it. And so there are lots of examples, actually, of people who were like, no, I met the Queen of the Fairies. and then they were defiant.
Well, wait to remember, especially what's interesting about the fairies kind of goes a little bit into what Elie was saying. That's when we really do get very English about it, because the fairy faith absolutely continued within the British Isles and does today. So there were lots of people who believed in the fairies and were afraid of them. So there were people seeking them out actively. They wouldn't have thought of themselves as witches. But,
we got a religious crazy person sitting as a curse.
Okay.
I love it. I love it.
Why are they on our show? They probably found us on YouTube.
That's why I brought up all that long history of England, to try to illustrate how magical the thinking was already.
Yeshua is the Hebrew name for Jesus.
Yeah.
It's an angel's.
I know, right?
Oh, sweetie, maybe you should just go read all the things Jesus actually said in the Bible and be quiet now.
But the long history of England.
Because it was I wanted to present that it was such a magical thinking country anyway, with the wizards and the dragons.
Well,
and
they
the elves and
they
the
also didn't kill that
underground.
many witches
No,
compared to other
900,
countries.
Like 900 only. In all those
Oh, it's
years.
way less than that.
Well, I just read today 600 to 900. 600
In
to
England?
900 only.
There's only like 3,600 in like most of the.
Well, I'm sure there were a lot of people killed that's not recorded. They didn't record every person killed.
But I'm saying England didn't torture or kill a lot of witches
No,
compared
I
to
know.
continental Europe.
I know.
No, not
So the general
comparatively.
number
Of
say
course
like
we survived.
30 to 60,000 years.
There was probably more people killed as witches when the Protestants were trying to purge England of Catholics. Than there was previous to that, because then things were thrown around.
Oliver Cromwell killed everybody.
Or there were lots of witch hunts in Protestant Germany.
But no,
too.
England was considered extremely lenient. We were hanging out with Pastor Phil, right? And I said, you know what I think's funny? I said, England and Salem are the only places that they didn't burn witches; they just hung us. And now we've come back in those places and we thrive. Maybe they should have burned us.
They should have. That's your mistake.
They didn't burn us in those places, so now witches are all over these places. But anyway, I think we're at a do, aren't we?
We are.
So wrapping up this episode, it was a fun one. I enjoyed it. So we won't be here for the next 2 weeks. We'll be back the 11th, and we're going to be doing The Psychic Witch or something like that. So we'll be talking about psychic abilities in relation to witchcraft and our thoughts on it, that sort of thing. It's kind of one I've avoided for a while, but I think it'll be a good topic. Elie will just tell us all we've all functioned as psychics for a living at one point in time, myself included. So we'll be discussing that and try to have some fun with it. Maybe we'll play an ESP game. No, I don't know. Who gets to do the icebreaker for that? Oh, it's Elie's turn for an icebreaker.
Good.
God.
So psychism and witchcraft the 11th, right?
2 weeks to
2 weeks to think about it.
God
But
help us.
in the meantime, next Friday we will be doing Candlemas here, and then we will be doing Candlemas in Saturday in Salem the week following.
Yes.
And then we will be back the 11th for the psychic witch, or what should we call it? The witchcraft and psychic abilities.
Yes,
Psychic
yes.
witch?
Yeah.
Witchcraft and psychic abilities.
Yes.
All right.
Because
Cool.
there's a lot of
Witchcraft and
different ways we can
witchcraft
approach
and
that. But
psychic
not just
abilities.
there's a lot of ways why they're.
Thank you all for joining us. It was a wonderful time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, whenever you watch us, and we will see you on the 11th.
Come see us at the store.
Bye, guys.